Picture this. It's a warm morning in late 2013. A helicopter skims low over Guam's northern jungle. Out the side door, a crew member shoves a cardboard box into the wind. Thousands of tiny parachutes spill out. They drift down like confetti at the world's strangest party, spinning and catching sunlight as they fall into the canopy below. Each one carries a single dead baby mouse. And inside each mouse, enough hidden poison to kill a snake. When the news broke, the internet lost its mind. Late-night hosts made jokes. PETA called it cruel. Taxpayers asked why millions of dollars were being spent on, and I swear this is real, airdropping dead rodents from helicopters. But here's what nobody understood yet. Those mice weren't a punchline. They were a last resort. And the story behind them is one of the strangest ecological disasters you've never heard of. It starts with a single stowaway, and it ends with an island fighting for its life. Guam is tiny, 31 miles long, 6 miles wide, a green speck in the blue Pacific. But after World War II, this little island became one of America's most important military outposts. Bombers launched from here, submarines refueled here. Strategically, Guam punched way above its weight. And then, quietly, something arrived that would cause more lasting damage than any bomb ever dropped on the island. Sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s, nobody knows the exact moment, a brown tree snake slithered off a cargo ship. Or maybe it crawled out of an airplane's wheel well. The how doesn't matter. What matters is what it found. Paradise. See, Guam's birds had evolved for thousands of years without snakes. Let that sink in. They had zero fear of something crawling up a tree toward their nest. They laid eggs out in the open. They slept on low branches. They had no defenses because they'd never needed any. And the brown tree snake. Back home in Australia and Papua New Guinea, it was just another mid-tier predator. Nothing special. Plenty of bigger animals kept it in check. But on Guam, no predators, no competition, unlimited food. Warm, humid air year-round. It was like dropping a wolf into a petting zoo, and what happened next was devastating. But nobody would understand just how devastating until it was far, far too late. At first, people noticed small things. A favorite songbird wasn't showing up anymore. Lizards seemed scarcer, nothing alarming, but by the 1980s the truth was impossible to ignore. 10 of Guam's 12 native forest bird species were gone, not declining, not endangered, extinct on the island, wiped out completely. The Guam flycatcher, the rufous fantail, the Micronesian kingfisher, a bird so beautiful it looked hand-painted, all gone from the wild. And I want you to feel what that actually meant for people living there. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you can't hear birds anymore. Not fewer birds, none, just wind through empty branches. Locals called it the silent forest. And once you heard that phrase, you couldn't unhear it. But silence was only the beginning. Those missing birds had been doing something critical for thousands of years, carrying seeds. They'd eat fruit, fly across the forest, and drop seeds in new soil. That's how the jungle renewed itself. Without birds, that cycle collapsed. Researchers found seed dispersal had dropped by over 90%. Seeds fell beneath parent trees and rotted. The forest was slowly eating itself. Then came the spiders. With no birds hunting them, spider populations exploded. Studies showed Guam had roughly 40 times more spiders than neighboring islands the snakes hadn't reached. Webs hung between trees like sheets. Tourists described walking through curtains of silk. And the snakes didn't stay in the jungle. They crawled into neighborhoods, into garages, into baby cribs. That's not an exaggeration. Parents on Guam learned to check their children's beds at night. But the economic damage was even worse. Brown tree snakes are incredible climbers. They scaled utility poles, wrapped themselves around transformers, and shorted out the power grid. Guam averaged around 80 snake-caused blackouts per year. Each one knocked out businesses, spoiled food, shut down traffic lights, millions of dollars, every single year. Because of one species of snake. And hovering over all of it was the real nightmare. The snakes were trying to leave. They'd been found in cargo shipments headed to Hawaii, to Saipan, to other Pacific islands with vulnerable bird populations. If even one pregnant female made it to Hawaii, the catastrophe could repeat on a much larger scale. Guam wasn't just fighting for itself. It was the front line for the entire Pacific. For decades, people tried everything. Dogs were trained to sniff out snakes at ports and airports, and honestly, the dogs were heroes. They caught hundreds of snakes that might have escaped to other islands. But that was defense. On the island itself, the snakes were winning. Thousands of traps were set across forests and neighborhoods. Hunters went out at night with flashlights. Researchers tested chemical repellents, barriers, even electrical fences. Nothing worked at scale. There were simply too many snakes. Some estimates suggested densities of up to 13,000 per square mile in northern Guam. Let that number sit with you. 13,000 snakes in a single square mile of jungle. By 2013, the island may have been home to as many as 2 million brown tree snakes. 2 million. On an island you could drive across in 20 minutes. Trapping them one by one was like bailing out the ocean with a coffee cup. Guam needed something radically different. And that something came from the most unexpected place imaginable. A medicine cabinet. Here's a fact that still blows my mind. Acetaminophen, the stuff in Tylenol, the pill you take for a headache, is lethal to brown tree snakes. Just 80 milligrams, that's roughly 1/16 of a regular human tablet. For most other animals on Guam, birds, pigs, lizards, that dose is completely harmless. Nature had handed scientists a surgical weapon. The problem was delivery. How do you get 2 million tree-climbing nocturnal snakes scattered across a dense jungle to swallow a tiny dose of painkiller? You can't bait the ground. The snakes live in the canopy. You can't inject every snake. There aren't enough people on the island, so a team of USDA scientists came up with something that sounded absolutely insane: dead mice. Stuffed with acetaminophen, attached to tiny cardboard parachutes designed to snag in the treetops, dropped from helicopters. The logic was weirdly airtight. Brown tree snakes are scavengers. A dead mouse dangling from a branch is basically a free meal. The snake eats the mouse. The acetaminophen does its work. And because the bait hangs in the canopy, ground-dwelling animals never reach it. Targeted, efficient, scalable. Also completely ridiculous looking. In 2013, the U.S. government approved an $8 million program to test it. And on a quiet morning, the first helicopters went up. Animal rights groups protested. News anchors smirked. The internet turned it into a meme. But the scientists didn't care about optics. They cared about data. By 2014, the data came in, and it shut everyone up. In targeted drop zones, snake populations fell by 50% or more. Radio-tagged mice confirmed that snakes were finding and eating the bait within hours, long before anything else could get to them. Snake-caused power outages started declining. The economic bleeding slowed. Now, and I want to be honest here, this wasn't a Hollywood ending. The snakes didn't vanish. The birds didn't magically return to the forests. Most of Guam's lost species still exist only in captive breeding programs, in zoos thousands of miles from home. But for the first time in decades, something shifted. Conservationists who had spent years watching the situation get worse could finally imagine it getting better. The Guam rail, a small flightless bird bred in captivity for years, had already been reintroduced to a tiny islet off Guam's coast. With snake numbers falling on the main island, the dream of bringing birds back to Guam's own forests moved from impossible to maybe. And maybe, after decades of loss, was enormous. Other islands battling invasive predators started studying Guam's approach. What looked like a joke became a blueprint, proof that sometimes the craziest idea in the room is the only one that works. But Guam's war isn't over. The northern jungles are still full of snakes. Total eradication may never happen with current technology. The focus now is containment, protecting critical habitats, keeping populations suppressed in key areas, and making absolutely sure no snake ever leaves the island. Ports and airports stay on high alert. The dogs still work every shipment. The threat to Hawaii hasn't gone away. In 2020, the federal government pledged millions more for continued snake control. More research, more innovation, and yes, probably more parachuting mice. Here's what stays with me about this story. When the world first heard about dead mice falling from helicopters, everybody laughed. It sounded absurd. It looked absurd. But behind that absurdity was a team of scientists who had watched an island lose its birds, its forests, its power grid, and its peace of mind, and refused to give up. They took a common painkiller, a dead mouse, and a piece of cardboard, and they built a weapon that actually worked. Guam's forests may never sound the way they did 100 years ago. But because someone was willing to look foolish, those forests have a chance. And I think there's something in that worth remembering. The best ideas don't always look brilliant at first. Sometimes they look completely ridiculous. The trick is knowing which ridiculous ideas to laugh at and which ones to drop from a helicopter.